Hi, so this video is fairly different from most of the stuff on my channel, but it goes along with the last ones I uploaded about the state of Cyrodiil and Battlegrounds, and I think it needs to be talked about. Basically, I will address everything that feels wrong with the Elder Scrolls Online as of Update 20 Murkmire. Now, some of it will be subjective and based off my own experience with the game, but most of the critique is pretty general and I think can be echoed by a large amount of endgame players. So, let's start with PvP. When it comes to PvP, you have three options available to you: open world PvP with Cyrodiil, 4v4v4 Battlegrounds without CP, or else one-on-one dueling where CP is enabled. I'll talk first about outnumbered PvP and then about the larger objectives in the Alliance war gameplay. Over the course of the past year and a half, ZOS has been consistently nerfing all the tools available to both survive and thrive when outnumbered. It came in the form of proc sets with 1 Tamriel, cost increased poisons with Dark Brotherhood, then sustained nerfs with Morrowind, sustained nerfs which incidentally they have been reverting ever since, major defal and siphon at CP changes, snares, oblivion damage with Somersets, and more recently the whole enchant system overhaul, where enchants are proccing on every single bleed tick, thing which by the way is still not fixed when you're in Wrobel form. Outnumbered PvP is supposed to be challenging, and nobody expects to win every fight. Being ultimately killed by the outnumbering faction is part of the experience. The difference between small scale now and a year ago, however, is the degree of enjoyment you have. With all of our survival and sustain tools nerfed, when facing players that will negate your healing, pump you up with oblivion damage, and snare you to death so that you can't even roll dodge, streak, or sprint to line of sight, the only choice really available to you is just to sheath your weapons and die. There's just little to no counterplay abilities left in the game, and people don't like hard counters. It doesn't make for smart, challenging, or interesting gameplay. And I'm not saying competitive, because competitive in ESO in one sentence is a joke in and of itself. But even casual games have to have some semblance of balance to make the game enjoyable for as many people as possible. Nowadays it's just pointless to venture out into open world PvP without at least 5 or 6 friends and a dedicated healer. But guess what? A game that expects you to rely on other people in order to have fun is a pretty bad game. If not outnumbered PvP, what else is there to do in Cyrodiil then? You can mention taking keeps, playing the map and making your faction proud of course, but there's several issues with that. For one, the servers are trash. The servers can't handle large-scale fights ever since ZOS implemented an anti-bot system years ago. As soon as you reach a large Zerg fight near a keep, your FPS will drop by a lot, the ping will rise, all the skills will be delayed. It's not uncommon to see people just port around or die from being health desynced, or getting to endless loading screens, and when it comes to certain cursed keeps like Chalman, you will just crash before even reaching the fight itself if you approach it too fast. If you're on horseback with speed boost and going towards Chalman in prime time, just forget about it, you'll just crash. You actually have to dismount and pace yourself before arriving to the keep if you want the service to catch up. Like, that's how bad it is. There's also very little reward for defending a keep. Death ticks are usually worth way less than attack ticks, meaning that the general behavior you see in Cyrodiil is a large group just capturing a keep and then moving on, while the other faction sieges the keep back with 0 defenders on your side, because staying and defending is pointless when you can make more AP by sieging the next undefended keep instead. I personally have nothing against Zerg fights. I mean Zerg versus Zerg, not 24 people chasing one guy out of thirstiness for AP. Sure, it's less challenging than outnumbered PvP in my opinion, but still I have nothing against sieging in Zergs or running along with whatever faction I'm on. But it's sadly pointless when you just crash every other minute because of server performance issues. Next comes the whole map gameplay. To put it simply, Alliance score is pointless. It doesn't bring you anything except one more reward at the end of the 30-day campaign, and that fleeting feeling of faction pride, assuming you care about such things. And let's face it, ESO is no World of Warcraft when it comes to faction pride. One faction will always nightcap the map in off hours. Take for instance AD on PCU Vivek. For the past 2 years, they have just been nightcapping the map and getting a lot of score for simply zerging down empty keeps. And since outnumbered PvP is pretty pointless these days, there's not even any incentive to log on to opposing factions if you happen to play in these off hours, when you can just log on to your AD character and leech your tactics from empty keeps alongside them. And sure, AD does this consistently on the main campaign Vivek, but EP is equally guilty of this on Sotha and DC on Shore. There's just really no incentive to PvP against each other when you get more AP by sieging down empty keeps on an empty map. And for most players, AP is a way more valuable reward than the feeling of participating in a good fight. Just look at the Bleaker's AP farm from last year. That clearly illustrates it. Now, let's talk about BGs. Now, BGs as a concept is good, but there's several problems with it in practice. The lack of champion points in BGs makes the cancer sets and skills available in-game even worse. When being bled and slowed to death is already pretty annoying in CP-enabled campaign, so without champion points it's even worse. On the other hand, pure heal tanks are overperforming in BGs. It's not uncommon to see deathmatches end before any single team even got 200 points, because to put it simply, if every team has a dedicated healer, nobody will die. Somehow no CP is even less balanced than CP. Tanks are tankier, DPS players are squishier, and while your general damage output is lower, it has no bearing on things like Taurogs with infused weapons and oblivion damage, or bleeds, neither of which you can mitigate. The second issue with BGs is the prevalence of pre-made teams facing randoms, and matches that start with compositions like 3v3v4 or 2v3v3. You cannot win modes like Domination, which rewards players by stacking on flags, if the other team outnumbers you. Like, the flags simply won't flip. When it comes to pre-mades, the usual Battleground experience in Murkmire can be summed up with one 4-man stack, with healers and bleeds, and maybe one or two werewolves abusing the whole infused enchant on every single bleed tick facing you, and you're just a solo curer, and have two other non-capped CP randoms with you. And I know CP doesn't matter in BGs, but I'm just using it as a benchmark for experience and time spent in game. And if you're the one queuing of pre-mades, molesting random solo queuing people isn't exactly fun. Most of them will just leave the BG before the match is over, or just stay at base, jumping around and waiting for this drawn-out, painful match to be done. Then, when it comes to dueling, to put it plainly, ESO is not a game balanced around duels. Some classes have hard counters, and some sets or skills are broken and overpowered in a 1v1 environment, which means that you have to come up with a lot of rules that ban pretty much every single thing fun in this game, and limit your options considerably. You cannot use pets as a stalk, for instance. Shadowrun is out of the question, Shieldbreaker and Slid either. No Troll King, Malubeth, Ovgor, Pirate Skeleton. DKs can't use wings against Magblades, because then they can just reflect pretty much everything thrown at them. You get the gist. And it's evidenced by the fact that dueling setups don't work in open world PvP and vice versa. Not to mention, and that's PCU specific, that I know of anyways, the dueling community is very toxic, which means that duels are less about trying to get better and improve, and more about pride and honor and exposing the loser and whatnot. I mean, I've been guilty of that myself in the past, but what I mean is, in general, it doesn't make for a fun environment in the long run. Just look at Legendary Mage's Coliseum dueling tourneys gatherings back in the day. Most people came there for the salt, not for good fights or progression. To sum it up, there's a serious lack of balance in this game, be it CP or no CP, mostly due to proc sets, damage buffs across the board, and hard counters introduced over the years, with some classes like Stam Warden and Stamblade grossly overperforming compared to others. On top of that, if you want to focus less on combat and more on just rolling around with your faction and participating in sieges, you soon come to realize that there's no reward for playing for your faction, a thing which is only exacerbated by server issues and terrible latency. Still in the PvP category, let's talk about buggy and broken skills, abilities and whatnot. Dying when outnumbered in PvP wouldn't be such an issue if you were able to kill at least one or two enemies, as you used to. But another thing to note is that PvPers are tankier now than ever before. Heavy armor is a problem, and hear me out, like pre-Dark Brotherhood, heavy armor was niche. It provided a great deal of tankiness without being overpowered, overshadowing light and medium armor. Now, however, on stamina, unless you're a Nightblade, and even then bleed blades are better off in heavy, or playing in an organized group with dedicated healers, there's virtually no reason for you to go medium over heavy. And it's not because of the heavy armor passives, as Zos erroneously seems to think, what with them nerfing them patch after patch. It's because of all the heavy armor exclusive proc sets they introduced over the years, meaning sets like Fury, 7th Legion, Ravager, or Advancing Yukida for instance. Sure, you can get those items as jewelry and weapons and wear medium armor, but why bother, when you can just have better damage and survival rates and even sustain in heavy? Just equip 7th Legion and Fury with dual wield, slot Bleeds and Steel Tornado with two-handed backbar for that sweet snare removal in the form of forward momentum, and you're just ready to go. Heavy armor isn't a problem, heavy armor sets are, and Zos just keeps pushing out heavy armor sets designed to do damage, and medium armor sets designed for sustain, which doesn't make any sense at all. On top of tankier players that rely on proc sets and one-button spamming, one thing to note is that some abilities don't have any counterplay available, be it class-specific or just in general. Take Snipe for instance. A lot of the time you get that thing where a snipe is queued, meaning you're hit with 2 or 3 snipes at the same time. when the ability itself takes 1 second to cast, and the damage should by no means be instantaneous. So that's just 22k plus damage in an instant. Bonus points if you queue the snipes on purpose with unmorphed silver bolts, which used to be an exploit pretty prevalent among the Russian Nightblades, like pre-Wolf Hunter. And the Murkmire Draining Shot changes, which increased its range, are pretty bad too, considering the CC from Draining Shot is notably buggy and unbreakable. If you're being Draining Shot on an uneven terrain, you won't be able to CC break that ability for over 3 to 5 seconds, if even. Same for Incap, for instance. Half the time you'll just be lying on the ground and able to CC break despite having enough stamina to do so, and that's squarely on Zos. Another example I had in mind when I mentioned that the game has less and less counterplay options is snares. Stamina players have access to shuffle, should they be Nightblades or gimp themselves by wearing medium armor, or forward momentum, as an effective snare removal tool. For Magicka players though, unless you're Warden with a Betty Netch or Macpla with Ritual, you cannot effectively remove snares, and the whole just slot purge is a meme. Like, good luck spamming a 5k plus Magicka ability on yourself when you're outnumbered and most likely not afflicted with all sorts of poisons and siphon debuffs. Not to mention purge is a single focus skill that literally does nothing else but cleanse you from debuffs, whereas forward momentum provides a 20% more weapon damage and a heal over time. Speaking of single purpose skills, that's another bone to pick with Zos. On one hand you get statements from Eric Wrobel, the lead combat designer, about them wanting to make skills like Crystal Fragment's single purpose by removing its stun. And yes, I'm still salty about this, by the way, because they want skills to either do damage or stun or snare or buff you up. Okay. Or them, for instance, removing the stun from the Magicka morph of the Warden Shulks, or the damage portion of Runecage. Then what about Incap, for instance? It's the best single damage ult in game, gives you a damage buff, reduces your target's healing, and stuns you if you charge it to 120 ulti, which is so very hard when you're a Nightblade and have passives specifically made to regen ultis faster. Isn't this a bit too front-loaded for your tastes? Or Destructive Reach when it comes to Magicka skills. It does damage, more so than even Force Balls if you have a Master Destro staff. It stuns, and it applies a dot or a debuff depending on the morph and type of staff you pick. Point is, Zos is very inconsistent when it comes to holding a single reasonable vision for combat in ESO. Now, onto PvE. Despite Zos's whole play as you want marketing strategy, when it comes to endgame PvE, there is a meta, and some classes perform better than others at certain roles. And Zos's policy of just nerf hammering everything that overperforms even slightly instead of buffing the underperforming skills and specs really turns endgame PvEers off the game. Take all the Magblade nerfs with Murkmire, for instance. So many raiders have quit because of them, because they're class that they have invested time and energy and just doesn't feel fun. I feel the same way about Sork. With all the sustain nerfs in Morrowind, DPSing in PvE on Max Sork just isn't fun. You're just constantly out of Magicka, struggling to sustain, and Wrobel's solution of just slot dog deal once again proves that the lead combat designer has not a single clue about this game. And you know what the sad part is? Trials like Cloudrest or Asylum still need a full Nightblade GG team in order to complete them with competitive scores, and that's despite the nerfs. That's another thing to note. Zos wants class diversity in their trials, but on the other hand they implement mechanics that are excessively punishing and pigeonhole you into one single spec. Like all the Oblivion damage in Cloudrest, for instance. Basically in Murkmire you need a full Magicka Nightblade team for Cloudrest and Asylum, and full Stamblade groups for the rest of the trials if you want to have competitive scores and great runs. Where's the diversity in that? With Homestead it was the same thing with full Petsork teams and one Magicka DK to provide debuffs, for instance. Every patch it's the same thing and people are getting tired of it. And again, sustain is a really big issue, at least on Magicka specs. Charging a heavy attack with a fire staff just isn't nearly as organic as heavy attacking with dual wield during your rotation, and it's just simply not fun. And last word about trials? Mini trials, really? That's the laziest thing Zos could come up with. It takes a competitive endgame guild 6 minutes to do Veteran Cloudrest +3. How is that a viable and enjoyable option for endgame? I'm sorry Zos, but it's just lazy as hell. Now, another parts of the endgame PvE is 4-man group dungeons, and that's where I have a major problem with, especially the Wolf Hunter ones. So, prior to Murkmire release, Zos announced that they were nerfing shields in PvE in order for healers to feel needed for endgame content. And fair point, I mean you can easily clean even DLC dungeons like Fanglair or Scalecaller with 3DDs. Hell, it's better to have 3DD teams since it allows you to skip some mechanics that you wouldn't otherwise. Just equip Slimecrow, tank can slot Elemental Drain on back bar, and that's it, like no healer needed. However, and this is a personal pet peeve as someone that does heal in PvE, what's the freaking point of a healer when all the mechanics in your Wolf Hunted dungeons one-shot? What's the freaking point? Any random werewolf ad, Pounce to Breath and Moonhunter Keep one-shots. All boss mechanics one-shot. If you don't block Atronachs in much of sacrifices, they one-shot. Same can be said about Fanglair, like the Ghost Wall one-shots, Bone Colossi one-shot, heavy attacks from the Menagerie boss one-shots, like Trolls and Scalecaller one-shot, heavy attacks from the Minotaur in Falkreath one-shot, heavy attack from Earthgore in Bloodroot one-shots. Zos has failed to understand that people run 3DDs not because you can just mitigate damage with shields, but because it's faster to skip those mechanics altogether with more damage. Because when these mechanics happen, they do one-shot. So what's the point of a freaking healer, seriously? It's just very frustrating, and just like with PvP offers no counterplay at all, because it's either like too little damage to be of import, or just one-shots through block. The final part will be about general gripes with Zos and their perceived laziness. All in all, the vision the developers have for the endgame in ESO is muddled and confusing, beyond the get as much money as possible from our player base, well there still is one, by overwhelming them with cosmetics and crown store additions. Comments such as, "We want shields to be a potent tool for PvE tanks" from the lead combat designer Wrobel just feel really out of touch with the community and the reality of this game, and considering they test PvP sustain on training dummies with Elemental Drain, it's really unsurprising. Their whole attitude of take more healers and different classes into endgame doesn't match with the design of their own dungeons and trials, which just pigeonhole you into one spec for maximum efficiency. You know what would be fun to see? A Veteran Asylum run, like +2, you know, like Veteran Asylum HM, run by a full dev group with no ranged DDs. Oh, and a Sork tank, because it's play as you want, am I right? That would make for an entertaining ESO live. For the past year or so, it just feels like Zos has been very lazy. A great example of this is the absolutely insane speed nerf with the Murkmire patch. Zos has been made aware that 3 Swift jewelry with potions that gave you major expedition and stamina returns was overperforming. That one setup, that one combo, that wasn't used by that many players in PvP. That's it. So what did Zos do? Instead of focusing on how to best stop all sources of speed from stacking, they just nerfed everything. They made the speed from freaking Boundless Storm arguably the worst armor buff in game last 4 seconds, along with every other source of major expedition except Rapids. That wasn't needed, that doesn't fix the problems, and it makes the game way less fun now because everyone is slow as hell, and on top of being snared. And guess what, like people don't like slow-paced combat with cast times and delays. It's just a very lazy and very frustrating solution to a problem that could have easily been dealt with otherwise. Zos' laziness extends to the fact that they release major patches quarterly and give little to no updates on their awareness of bugs and broken stuff to fix, though arguably it has been better this past year. Now, I have nothing against changes to balance classes and skills, it's supposed to be good for the game. However, most of the changes Zos makes come straight out of nowhere. They aren't wanted by the community, and they really do tend to go overboard with the nerf hammer without giving anything in return. It's literally the only game I have ever played where I dread the patch notes, because you just know they'll butch things up somehow. And then Daddy Wrobel just teases you with promised future buffs with no ETA, like just stay a little longer darling, feed us your subscription money a little bit more, and we promise you it's gonna get better someday. And that laziness extends to the content they put out too. Murkmire is smaller than Clockwork City in terms of storyline and zone size, and Zos just makes things grindier and grindier. And of course, like, I know that the grind is part of any self-respecting MMO, but come on, at some point it's just time to stop. Have you seen the Murkmire prep dailies? It's 6 boring, repetitive daily quests a day, one whose objectives are the furthest away possible from way shrines, and you need 150 of those to get an achievement. Like, please. Or the grind for the Welkiner motive. First you get motive fragments, then you get some glue from the weekly quest, and then you can assemble 10 of those motive fragments into one of the 15 pages you need. And all that from one of the worst mini trials currently in game. It's like they just introduced this to make you feel like you have stuff to do, when truth is it's boring, useless, and there's little to no effort put into it on their parts. Even with the whole class rep system they started, the developers just seem really out of touch with the endgame player base. But that's the thing, like the patch notes they put out, the changes they implement, they bear no impact on the players that log in once every 3 months to play through the storylines, buy a couple of lore-friendly costumes, and then just move on until the next story comes out. They don't care about skill tooltips or shield changes or major defile or veteran HM trials. After all, you can just do pretty much any and all overland content and quest content naked, and you don't need to have dungeons and trials set in VEDs in order to play through their quests. Personally, I don't like the direction this game is taking. As someone that plays after work or uni depending on the days, like, it just seems pointless to log in for a couple of hours just to get frustrated online due to all the aforementioned issues. Lack of balance, server issues in large-scale PvP, lack of diversity and very punishing mechanics in PvE, hard counters and zero counterplay options, and devs that are really out of touch. Make no mistake, ESO is still a great game with a beautiful world if you're interested in just chilling around Tamriel and getting storyline quests done, though one can argue that they're still pretty simplistic in the whole like chosen hero saves the day thing, but then again, it is an MMO. It just feels like there's no endgame anymore. Nothing to keep you playing. Most of my friends and generally people I've known for the past years have already quit because of all these issues, so that doesn't help the matter one bit. As it is, ESO is a beautiful but very frustrating mess. One that I don't regret investing time and money in, but one that feels more and more alien to the people that have been there since the start, or well, mostly since the start. Personally, I bought the game in October 2014. To end on a more metaphorical note, I could compare ESO to the ship the Argonauts used in ancient Greece to get to the Golden Fleece and do all of their heroic, myth-worthy deeds. After all of their adventures, the ship, like the Argo, stayed moored for people to admire, and over the years the wood started rotting. So once one plank was rotten, it got replaced, and so on and so on and so on, until you had a brand new ship that looked the same but had no piece of the original left in it. And then philosophers started debating, was it still the same ship or not? This is how ESO feels at the moment, and I'm not sure it's going to get any better.